Modern sci-fi horror wasn't born with Christopher Nolan making a sad space movie with Hans Zimmer playing sad piano music in the background. Nope. A huge chunk of modern sci-fi horror came from literature, pulp magazines, radio-age paranoia, and those wild little B-movies that turned those ideas into cheap but unforgettable monsters. Space movies have evolved over time and inspired many visionary artists and filmmakers to create more detailed sets and more grotesque-looking monsters, but initially, those sets and monster designs were funny, caricaturish, and full of visible flaws. However, they're still important, so that's why in today's video, we're going to be talking about some of our favorite B-space movies where monsters from other planets invade the Earth and a lot of chaos happens afterwards. So, without any further ado, let's get started. The Thing from Another World, 1951. This 1951 classic is technically a B-movie, but if you start looking at it differently, you'll realize that half of modern sci-fi thrillers wouldn't have existed the same way if it weren't for this film. Also, in case you're unaware, this film was the inspiration for John Carpenter's legendary The Thing in 1982. And just like that film, we've got an isolated Arctic research station in The Thing from Another World where they discover a mysterious thing buried in the ice. A group of Air Force officers try to retrieve it, but they accidentally destroy the craft, leaving behind one thing: a giant humanoid alien body. Now, in the original story, the novella named Who Goes There by John W. Campbell Jr., this alien thing was a shape-shifting creature, and we saw its cinematic representation in the 80s remake. However, in this 1951 film, alien creature is a giant humanoid monster portrayed by James Arness, who stood around 6'7", which gave him a towering presence on set. The makeup effects tried to give him a Frankenstein-like look, but the film tried to keep it obscure, covered with shadows to hide the flaws of its low-budget production. Howard Hawks produced the film, and his fingerprints are all over its rhythm, dialogue, and staging, even though Christian Nyby is officially credited as the director. Fans and historians still debate how much Hawks actually directed. Nyby was Hawks' editor for a long time, so to give his directing career a green signal, Hawks put him in the front. The cast, including the classic military archetype played by Kenneth Tobey, gave some solid performances. Sometimes these long overlapping dialogues turned the sci-fi horror into a courtroom drama set in Antarctica. Then there's the ending, where the monster is destroyed, but the danger still isn't over. The famous "Watch the Skies" line turns the ending into a warning. This may not be the last time humanity has to look up, fear what is coming. It, The Terror from Beyond Space, 1958. The reason these heavily CGI-dependent modern sci-fi thrillers even exist today is because of these primitive movies from the 50s that most people don't even know about. One of them is It, The Terror from Beyond Space. A low-budget, scrappy sci-fi thriller ended up inspiring generations of filmmakers to imagine a world beyond Earth and space where the living beings aren't quite as social as humans. Back then, the king of low-budget filmmaking, Edward L. Kahn, whose filmography is a mix of all sorts of different thriller subgenres, teamed up with Jerome Bixby to make this film. Kahn was obsessed with sci-fi but didn't have the resources to make a proper space movie, yet he didn't give up. Instead, he got into the production anyways and created an extraterrestrial monster movie that is often considered one of the key godfathers of Alien. Marshall Thompson played Colonel Edward Carruthers, who was the only surviving member of a crew returning from Mars, so naturally, everyone assumed that he had killed his crew. No one believes his story, so a rescue ship comes to Mars to bring him home for trial. The problem is, the real killer sneaks aboard, and the return trip becomes a claustrophobic monster hunt. No wonder the monster design looked primitive, with the rubber suit, bulging eyes, and skeletal mouth that made him less of an alien, and more like some cursed cousin of the creature from the Black Lagoon. But we find these little outdated details in B-movies kind of charming, because creativity can be subjective. When you lack resources, you come up with different ways to tell a story. Of course, there was a huge lack of budget and resources in this film, so they relied on shadow, light, movement, and sound, especially to sell terror. Well, every great thing starts from a bad idea because a weird-looking alien in the 50s inspired people to think more creatively, and that's why today we've got monsters like the Xenomorph, hands down the final boss of sci-fi horror. Invaders from Mars, 1953. Directed and designed by William Cameron Menzies, Invaders from Mars follows this young boy named David, played by Jimmy Hunt, whose cute little munchkin face was the soul of the film. One night, David spots a flying saucer landing behind his house near a sandpit, but when his father goes out to investigate, something mysterious attacks him, changing him into a completely different person who's angry and as violent as a monster. Now, the most bizarrely fascinating thing in this movie are the Martians, and especially their leader, who, with his giant exposed brain, is trapped inside a glass chamber and controlled by some mutant green humanoids. The visuals are very comic book inspired, and we also spotted some influence from the surrealistic paintings of Remedios Varo. Tobe Hooper later remade this film in 1986, and that version was hella creepy, but it didn't have those innocent monster designs that we find in the original. The zippers visible on the backs of those Martians were hilarious. Even after all those little mistakes, this film is still a landmark classic because it became one of those childhood nightmare sci-fi films that later filmmakers and genre fans keep circling back to. I rewatched this film pretty recently after the restored BFI 4K version was out, just to enjoy those same old scenes in high resolution. After all, movies like Invaders from Mars, The Glitter Ball, and other strange childhood sci-fi discoveries aren't just films, they feel like memory capsules. Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 1956. Jack Finney's The Body Snatchers was serialized in Collier's in 1954, and it was later published in book form in 1955 during the time of Cold War tensions. It's strange that so many things have changed over the years, but that tension hasn't yet left us, even 2026. Science is evolving, and so are our worries about technology and foreign threats. Body Snatchers creatively use this foreign threat in the movie, depicting it as extraterrestrial seed pods turning people into mindless monsters. Don Siegel was the first to turn this story into a movie, and the rest was history. Siegel was one of those hard-edged American visionaries who knew how to unsettle the audience by telling a story pretty simply. He's not here to waste your time with melodrama. His only job is to terrify you and make you uncomfortable about science and its possibilities. The film follows Dr. Miles Bennell, portrayed by Kevin McCarthy, who discovers that the giant seed pods are growing human body duplicates while the originals sleep, turning them into pod people who look exactly like humans, except without the emotions. That's just the starting point from where this sci-fi thriller suddenly turns into psychological horror. Here, human identities and conformity fight each other, not countries, and that turning point turns this film into something beyond a B-movie. Sure, it's not as haunting as Philip Kaufman's remade version from 1978, where that terrifying expression on Donald Sutherland's face kept us up at night, but it's no less than a good sci-fi thriller, especially for its time. Those Dutch angles and uncomfortable, tight, close-up shots on the characters were some of the sharpest visual choices 1950s sci-fi horror had to offer. On top of that, the use of broad daylight instead of shadow and darkness made the horror look more real than ever. Plan 9 from Outer Space. We've finally come to a film that's way beyond the category of B-movie because it was made by none other than Ed Wood, a director who had a pretty famous nickname in Hollywood, the worst director of all time. That just made his iconic film, Plan 9 from Outer Space, a full-on cult classic. Plan 9 is perhaps the strangest movie on this list, although there are more to compete with it. But this legendary piece of cinema was written, produced, directed, and edited by Ed Wood himself, with the unforgettable narration handled by Criswell. Ed Wood loved movies more than anything in the world, but he really didn't care about certain rules of the craft. He did what he loved to do pretty unapologetically. Tim Burton even made a film on Ed Wood, starring Johnny Depp as the titular filmmaker, where he actually goes through the process of creating Plan 9 from Outer Space, and you get to see firsthand what a disaster it is. It's one heck of a comedy, which we can discuss later, but right now, let's talk about what Plan 9 is all about. Basically, aliens come to Earth to stop humans from creating a massive weapon that could destroy the universe. It's called the Solaranite Bomb. To prevent that, they use a genius strategy called Plan 9 to resurrect vampires, zombies, and ghouls from their graves. The film is also remembered as Bela Lugosi's final screen appearance, even though his footage was shot before the main Plan 9 production and inserted after his death. If you haven't heard the name Bela Lugosi before, he was one of the most famous Dracula actors of all time, but sadly, he ended his career in obscurity. Ed Wood, though, was a fan and close to Lugosi, and he initially filmed some random clips of him for a different project. Tragedy occurred when Lugosi took his last breath before the film began proper production. Ed used those unfinished shots in the movie to pay him one last tribute. So yeah, Plan 9 in many ways is total gibberish, never vanished from the conversation. Film schools study it, and directors reference this film, recognizing it as perhaps one of the strangest early horror sci-fi mashups of the time. And to be honest, we don't really care about the film's success, and neither did Ed Wood. The cardboard sets and awkward acting might be nonsensical. Ed Wood left a message behind. Life doesn't always need to make perfect sense. Why should movies? Devil Girl from Mars. The 1950s were a strange time for experimental genres, and the people making these films were pretty gutsy, we gotta say. Clearly didn't have the budget to pull off space epics, but so what? Next space movie we're going to talk about will feel more like a stage drama than a film. It was revolutionary in its own weird ways. Devil Girl from Mars, directed by David MacDonald, is based on a play by John C. Mather and James East. Patricia LaFan played the Devil Girl herself, Nya, a Martian woman who arrives on Earth to capture men and take them back to Mars as they're running out of the male species for the breeding process. It's a British B-movie through and through. It even puts a female character at the center, which still felt unusual, male-heavy sci-fi invasion cycle of the 1950s. Sometimes she goes on long monologues and has a few too many arguments with the humans, but we still find her outfit pretty iconic. She wears this tight black leather attire with a cowl, presenting herself as a powerful dominatrix who looks seductive but also kind of scary. She doesn't wield a lightsaber, but with that tight leather, she'd give Darth Vader tough competition in a who wore it better contest. The Brain Eaters, 1958. An extraterrestrial parasite arriving on Earth and attacking humans to infect their nervous system is probably one of the most overused invasion tropes ever. Our next film on the list, The Brain Eaters, directed by Bruno Visoda, deals with the exact idea. Infected human beings are turning into mindless puppets, and this invisible, parasitic alien is controlling them, connecting them to their alien intelligence network. Now, the problem that arrived along with the aliens was the issue of plagiarism. The Brain Eaters is mostly considered an even cheaper copy of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, a knockoff. The makers denied the claim, tried to make it unique. There was an even bigger problem. There was another story called The Puppet Masters, written by Robert A. Heinlein. He claimed that this film was based on his story without giving him any credit. He went so far as to sue the filmmakers over plagiarisms. The movie suffered pretty badly from this crisis of originality, but it still made a mark in the B-movie category. It was a thoroughly entertaining flick, and starring the sci-fi legend Leonard Nimoy, years before Star Trek made him a sci-fi icon. And then there are those wobbly little hairy parasites with their small antennas that look kinda cute. The budget was a little too small to create a more terrifying species. Actual terrifier in this project was the poster art made by Albert Callis, one of the great exploitation poster artists of that era, especially around American International Pictures style genre marketing. He made some terrifically vivid posters for films like The Amazing Colossal Man, Tillicus, and even the next one we're about to discuss, Invasion of the Saucermen. Invasion of the Saucermen, 1957. So if you're ready for another alien invasion, but with a side of comic relief, Invasion of the Saucermen, perfect pick for you. Directed by Edward L. Kahn, this movie never takes itself seriously, so prepare to dive into total absurdity. We've had enough Cold War tension and political subtext. Now it's time for some teenage drama when an alien comes to Earth to kill horny, drunk teenagers who just wanted to make out in peace. A group of teens is out at night having fun when an alien spaceship crashes nearby, and some bizarre-looking aliens with giant heads and bulging eyes comes out of the ship to attack these teens. The monster design, as expected, was a little underdeveloped, almost caricaturish, which cracks us up, but here's the twist. If 60% of this movie is an accidental comedy, the other 40% is a weird mix of horror drama. At times, these monsters can get really dangerous, like when they use needle-like claws to inject alcohol into victims, and in one case, it kills a man through alcohol poisoning. Meanwhile, the police investigate, and the teenagers panic. Everything around these aliens happens pretty fast. Maybe the best part of this film is that it never really drags. During those boring weekday nights, if you want to watch something stupidly funny, these cute little saucermen might just give you a good laugh. Missile to the Moon, 1958. Richard E. Cunha's Missile to the Moon discovers a weird kind of moon that's populated by the most beautiful women you'd ever find in the pages of vintage Playboy magazines. This one is basically a remake of Catwomen of the Moon, a 1953 lunar beauty queen fever dream that was recycled into another low-budget moon adventure. Sure, they tried to do some tweaks here and there to make it look like they cooked up the idea on their own. You guess what you're walking into from a mile away just by looking at the poster. Oh, and also, they have a giant woolly spider that looked better in the original movie. The story starts with a rocket ship inventor discovering that two fugitives have been taking shelter on his ship. He takes them hostage and forces them to travel with him to the moon. But once there, find an ancient civilization led by females. All the males have gone extinct. These 50s beauty queens are now attacking the men and capturing them as useful Earthmen for their dying lunar civilization. Yup, those were pretty common themes at the time, and they come back in nearly every other movie. We had to pick between Catwomen of the Moon and Missile to the Moon. We'd pick the former for its slightly more realistic portrayal of those spacemen, because at least they tried to care about realism. But that said, Missile to the Moon wins purely on entertainment value. I mean, it's so bad that it's good, and we truly believe in that phrase when it comes to an unserious remake of another unserious attempt at a space thriller. Killer Clowns from Outer Space, 1988. The way these killer clowns, K of course, mock the humans in this movie, honestly, Pennywise could never. Yeah, he's an extraterrestrial entity too, but he doesn't even come close to being this funny and straight up mischievous like these grotesque jokers from beyond the stars. Directed by Steven Chiodo and created with the Chiodo brothers' practical effects madness, Killer Clowns from Outer Space gives us a spaceship that looks like a giant circus tent in the middle of the town. The clowns' mission is to harvest human beings in the most insane ways. They have a variety of silly circus-themed equipment like cotton candy guns, popcorn guns, puppet-style traps, and balloon animals, which never make any sense in the entire film. And at center stage is our main protagonist with an even weirder name, Mike Tabak. His last name, Tabak. He becomes one of the first people to realize that the circus tent in the woods is a spaceship. This 80s B-comedy is a breath of fresh air on our list of old-school drive-in movies. We think it's even more absurd as a showstopper. Jokes aside, the Chiodo brothers made this film as a love letter to practical effects like puppetry, animatronics, and painted sets, all of which are used to bring these monsters to life. We always felt these grotesque features weren't really funny when they first appeared on screen. There was something really unsettling about them, which is part of why Killer Clowns would later go on to become a cult comedy thriller. After all, murders and violence don't always have to look so grim, funny as well. Like a space clown who would wrap your head in cotton candy and choke you to death. Well, that's all we got for you guys. We're wrapping things up because these are just a few names from a giant ocean of cinema with such oldies that should be remembered. If you haven't seen these films yet, check them out because they're usually available on YouTube or sitting in some dusty old VHS collection. So go check them out and have some fun. On that note, this is the end of our video, so if you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Also, let us know in the comments down below your favorite B sci-fi movie of all time, and who knows, maybe we'll make a full video on that next. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and we'll see ya in the next. Bye for now.